Thank you, and I also want to welcome everyone here. My name is Reverend Dean Bucalis. I'm the Executive Director of Mission Behind Bars and Beyond. We have a table over here. And I want to introduce, at least let you know which other service providers are with us today. We're grateful for them taking the time to share the work that they're doing. These are folks who are involved in the very work that most of you are involved with in the ministries that have taken your attention and have called you to serve those who are the least among us. So you'll notice around the perimeter of the room there are tables, and I want to just let you know which service providers are here. So Goodwill Industries, WellCare of Kentucky, Harrison Education and Literacy Program, Freedom 101, that bullet. Kentucky Injury Prevention and Research Center, Opportunity Network, Lolo Village, Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Kentuckiana, Humana Medicaid, Criminal Justice Forum, can't miss that one. Tri-County Community Action Agency, Lexington Rescue Mission, University of Louisville Health and Peace Hospital, Humana Kentucky Medicaid, Further Still Ministries, Mission Behind Bars and Beyond, Volunteers of America Mid-States, Seeds to Oaks, Bail Project, and then our special guest, Dale Recinella, has a table set up with some of the books that he has authored for you to visit. So we encourage you, they'll be here, these service providers will be here throughout the day, so we encourage you to go around and speak to them and pick up materials that may be helpful to you in your work and your ministry. So thank you all for being here.
All right. Okay, so we are going to get started with our keynote address, and I'll take a few minutes to introduce our keynote speaker, my brother Dale. So Dale received his master's in theological studies summa cum laude from Ave Maria University and his law degree magna cum laude from Notre Dame. He's a licensed Florida lawyer and has taught international law and business ethics in Europe at all graduate levels, including St. John's University at the Vatican. So most recently, he has served in a very unique capacity as a death row chaplain in the Florida Department of Corrections, and has appeared frequently, including on Vatican radio, for audiences across the nation as well as Europe. So he is here with his wife, Dr. Susan Recinella, and they have raised 5 children and 12 grandchildren. So anyone who can beat that, raise your hands. Yeah, that's quite a witness.
The grandchildren are still in process.
And the grandchildren are right, post hoc, they're still going. So I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you, Dale. Thank you.
I think you can see me over it, right? Good morning.
Good morning.
It's wonderful to be here. And I really do mean that because I went to college in Kentucky.
Oh!
Yeah.
Which one?
Now it's Thomas More University, but back when I went, it was just Thomas More College. And I remember telling my dad I had picked my college and it was on the corner of Dixie Highway and Buttermilk Pike. And he and my mama drove down from Detroit to see it. And when they got to Buttermilk Pike, my mother said, "Oh my gosh, where are we?" But it was wonderful in Kentucky, and it still is, and I love a reason to come back. So thank you for giving us a good reason to come back. We're glad to be here and glad to be a part of this wonderful conference. And I'm going to introduce our little Florida group that's here after I make a few acknowledgments. So Dr. Stephanie, thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Reverend Dean. We've been talking about this event for 2 years. And here we are. Mission Behind Bars and Beyond is a wonderful movement. And I really believe it is a movement. It's more than an organization. It is a movement. And it's a movement to move people from a place where they didn't want to get to a place where they need to be. It's a wonderful movement, and it is an honor to be a part of this with all of you today. When the men I minister to on Florida's death row, and by the way, I am a death row chaplain, but I don't work for the state. The State Department of Corrections has been keeping very close track of me for 22 years now, because I go to self-run on death row, and I also, if men pick me to be their spiritual advisor, or women now, we're getting ready to execute women too, I'm with them during death watch in the death house at their death cell, just feet from where they're going to be killed by the state. And that's usually a period of 5 to 6 weeks. But I'm there on behalf of the Catholic Church. I'm not there as an employee of the state. There's nothing wrong with being an employee of the state, but it's very important to me that I'm there without any financial interest on my part. So I am a full-time volunteer and have been for 21 years, and this is what we've been doing since we came back from Rome. When the men I ministered to on Florida's death row found out back in 1998 that I'm a recovered Wall Street finance lawyer, they told me, that is great news, because if Jesus can save a greedy, money-grubbing Wall Street lawyer, he'll have no problem forgiving me. And so I guess Jesus can use my story any way he wants. And frequently the guys will ask me, you getting ready to go back to that? I say, no, I'd rather be here. So Reverend Dean, I have a special place in my heart for all of us recovered lawyers. I haven't heard your whole story, but I hear tell that you also have been saved from the bar. And thank you, Father John Burke, who hosted us yesterday for a 2-hour group discussion and sharing, and who for most of his priesthood has been up to his earlobes in the work of social justice. And in case you don't know, if you haven't been paying attention to what Pope Francis is going through, social justice does not make you popular with everybody in the Catholic Church. You've been doing it right here in Louisville, especially in the West End. It seems I can't hear about Catholic social justice in Louisville without hearing references to St. William's Parish. So I've heard a lot of wonderful stories just in the short time we've been here. We've only been here 2 days. And it's just great to be part of this community with you today. And thank you, Cherry Hall. I'm sorry. Where are you, Miss Cherry? There you are. No sooner had we parked the van from Florida and gone into the registration desk, and there was Miss Cherry with our welcome bags with trail mix and chocolate horseshoes and lots of other goodies.
And the red and the blue.
And the red and the blue, yes. And so thank you for all your assistance in coordinating and getting us up here, and especially for the trail mix. And thank you, Dr. Stephanie. Where'd you go? There you are. We know Dr. Stephanie from Tallahassee. In fact, she forgot to mention the most important thing, which is that her husband and I were brothers on a chirp team at Christ Renews His parish. And that was how I met him, and that was how my wife and I met Dr. Stephanie. And when I found out she was working on a dissertation on how inmates with terminal illness were being treated in incarceration and the availability of services for hospice and what it did not only for the inmate who was dying, but for the inmates who were picked to take care of the inmates who were dying, all of whom reported that it was transformational for them. I knew I just had to get to know her better and to read her dissertation and to quote it extensively in my book on Catholic prison ministry. She was marvelous in kind of bringing me up to speed on something I'd had no experience with, and also giving me a lot of good pointers on where to find out what the state of the art is on prison hospice in the United States. It's tough to get it going. It's tough to get the legislatures and the executive to support it, because nobody wants to run for re-election and be accused by their opponent of caring about the bad guys or the bad women, as if God made bad guys and bad women. God has children, and some of them made bad mistakes. But when somebody's dying of cancer, or dying of liver disease, or dying of hepatitis, how dare we say, you don't deserve mercy? And then thinking we're going to stand before Jesus Christ ourselves when it's our turn and say, I want mercy. He said, that's not how it works. You want mercy? As you show mercy, you will receive mercy. Stephanie introduced me to a whole realm that's almost unheard of in Florida. The people in the department that are supporting it keep it a secret because they don't want the word to get out, because if it does, the legislature may squash it. What are we doing? I've been in death and dying ministry since 1988. My wife and I did it together in Tallahassee. People with cancer, with AIDS, and other diseases, terminal illness, on the streets, in apartments and homes, praying with people that were elected officials, praying with people that were partners in law firms, doctors, praying with people that had lied down on the back porch of a soup kitchen and not ever got up again. Every single person said, Brother Dale, pray with me for mercy. I never had one person say, pray for me that God will give me what I deserve. How dare we mock mercy and talk about it almost as if instead of a virtue, it's a vice to show mercy to our brothers and sisters who have made mistakes. And thank all of you for choosing to be here with us today. We are in a time of tremendous disregard for the needs of our fellow human beings. That disregard, that apathy, is at the core of the evil we are responding to today. In Florida, I'm called Chaplain Dale. In the Florida prison system, I'm called Brother Dale. Not because I'm a priest or a deacon. I'm not ordained, not a religious, I'm not under vows. I'm just a crazy lay guy with a very understanding wife and 5 very patient children. But nobody in Rayford or Stark, Florida, where death row and solitary confinement are, could say Recinella. And so they started calling me Brother Dale. And it stuck. When our daughter was in high school, she answered the phone and I heard her say, I'm sorry, sir, but there's nobody here called Brother Dale. And I ran and got the phone And it was the Secretary of Corrections from Tallahassee calling to see if I would accept the request to be somebody's spiritual advisor for an execution. So Brother Dale is what it is, and it's stuck. And even the bishops in Florida call me Brother Dale. And when some of our Catholic brothers and sisters who are extremely concerned about form mention that I'm not a brother, they say, he's not a religious brother, but that's his name. I welcome the opportunity to be with all of you and to learn of all the marvelous things you are doing here in the Bluegrass State, especially here in Louisville, to bring our brothers and sisters home from behind the bars, behind the walls, and behind the fences. Back in the old days, medieval old days, they would put walls around the city and put the people they didn't like on the outside of the walls. Well, now we're taking up a lot of the land, a lot more of the land, and so we have the free people all over the place, and we put up walls and put the people we don't like inside the walls. And we call it prisons, or as my brother Ken says, gated communities. We're going to get to that in a minute. I attended college here in Kentucky at Thomas More University. Put myself through college working a whole bunch of jobs. When I applied for the Michigan bar to be a lawyer in Michigan in early 70s, I had to list every part-time job I'd had in college, and if I remember right, it came to 19. But some of the ones I remember especially were midnight shift at Liberty Cherry and Fruit in Latonia, Kentucky, which I drove to from the Thomas More dorm on the 3L highway, and where I made the mistake the first day I showed up of wearing a double knit shirt and slacks, and they redesigned my shirt and shortened my slacks and put a pack of Camels in my shirt sleeve and said, "And that's how you show up for work here, sir." And I did. Working on the docks in the railroad yards in Latonia, loading fruit in 55-gallon drums. And I was the first driver for Federal Express out of the Cincinnati airport. Wow. That was way back in the early 70s when they were flying those little Falcon jets. They didn't have the big planes yet. They were just getting started. And they used to call me every morning at 3:45 a.m. and give me the time for my little plane to come in from Memphis, and I had to meet the plane at the airport and unload it, load the panel truck, and make all my deliveries in Cincinnati before 12 noon. That was a long time ago. I think now they have 150 panel trucks out of the Cincinnati airport every morning. But my day always started at the flashing red light in Hebron, Kentucky, at the river, where I had to wait for the ferry to cross over to the Ohio side and make my first delivery at Monsanto. And then I worked my way up River Road along the Ohio River, all the way to the Beachmont Levee, and then back to the factories and downtown. I think those were some of the best days of my life, watching the sunrise on the Ohio River every morning before going to school. So thank you for giving me a good reason to come back to some of my roots. Before I introduce our small team from Florida, I want to open our session with a quote from Pope Francis, that social justice Pope. Quote, "We are all the church, and we all must strip ourselves of this worldliness." That spirit that opposes the spirit of the Beatitudes. The spirit that opposes the spirit of Jesus. Our worldliness hurts us. It is very sad to find a worldly Christian who is sure, according to himself, of both the security that the faith gives and the security that the world provides. You cannot be on both sides. The church, all of us, must strip herself of the worldliness that leads to vanity, to pride, because that is idolatry. Close quotes. Thank you. And in case anybody's wondering where Pope Francis got the idea that greed is idolatry, it's from the epistles of Paul. He says so, plain and simple. About 8 years ago, the Catholic bishops of Florida, and I think we have 9 of them, and counting the auxiliaries in the Archdiocese of Miami, asked me to compile a training book for Catholic lay people doing prison ministry. That's this book, When We Visit Jesus in Prison, A Guide to Catholic Ministry. It took 5 years to write. And the reason was they wanted lay Catholics going into the prisons to have at their fingertips all the secular information about the statistics and the demographics and the incarceration of so much of America, but also to have at their fingertips, side by side with that, the rich heritage and traditions and teachings of the Church that we can arm ourselves with as we go into the prisons. And that also includes bringing people out of the prisons. It has 16 chapters trying to cover everything about prison ministry from soup to nuts. It was released in the Italian edition by the Dominicans this past March. And my wife Susan and I presented a copy of the new Italian edition to Pope Francis in June when we had a personal audience with him at the Vatican. What I want to call your attention to is that the very first chapter of this manual for Catholic prison ministry is titled The Social Justice Framework of Credible and Responsible Prison Ministry. The 2 closing chapters in Part 4, Chapter 15 and 16, are Economic Constraints that Affect Prison Ministry and Restorative Justice. And then the last chapter is Religious Constraints that Affect Prison Ministry and Restorative Justice. In short, in my view, with 30 years of prison ministry and 21 years on death row, solitary confinement, and max management, which is total sensory deprivation, I believe that credible and responsible prison ministry begins and ends with restorative justice. If we're not working to change it, and the states try as hard as they can to prevent us from that, they say you can't be an advocate, even a social justice advocate, and be allowed inside their most secure prisons. It's a security risk. You ought to see the size of the officers in there. Anybody that would think I'm a security risk isn't seeing straight. But that's what they say. But we got to find a way to do it anyway. So let me at this point introduce the team that came up from Florida. First is my wife of almost 40 years, Dr. Susan Recinella. You want to stand, honey? Susan is the director of the doctoral internship program at Florida State University and also supervises the internship for the master's program and the practicums for the bachelor's program. It is a huge counseling center because there's 48,000 students, 44,000 students at Florida State University. And so she has a tremendous amount of responsibility, but she was very happy to be able to make this trip. Susan has worked as my partner in death row ministry for 21 years. And we did ministry to the dying in Tallahassee during those 10 years together as well. Whatever we've done, we've found a way to do it as a couple. We were just approved by the state of Florida to minister pastorally to the women on Florida's death row who've had no pastoral ministry forever. They're down in Ocala, but when their warrant is signed, they're brought to the death house at Florida State Prison in Stark, just like the men are, except the men are moved from across the street. The women are moved 200 miles to a place they've never been, where they don't know a soul, not even the chaplains, the warden, or the staff. So we've been approved as a couple to minister to the women on Florida's death row for women in Ocala. When there's executions, and Susan's been doing this for 21 years, she takes annual leave from her job and comes to care for the families of the condemned while I'm caring for the man, or now woman, who's being killed by the state. Susan is a wonderful resource, and if you get a chance to talk with her, she'd love to answer your questions and share with you her experiences. Then I'd like to have you meet Ken Cofield. I met Ken in 1991. I had no intention of ever going to prison. A Southern Baptist chaplain who was the chaplain of one of Florida's largest men prisons and the largest men's prison in the panhandle of Florida, 50 miles west of Tallahassee, shamed me into coming to minister to people with terminal illness. Kenny was the chapel clerk. That's where I met him. And when he told me there were 42 inmates in line for a pastoral meeting with me, one-on-one, and I thought there would be 2 or 3. I mean, how many people can have terminal illness? And then he said he also wanted a pastoral meeting. I looked at him and I was pretty upset. I was still a Wall Street lawyer at that time. I got upset easy. And I said, and what's your terminal illness? And he said, sin. Can you deal with that? I got to know him really well. And within a couple of years, my wife and I were visiting him pastorally. And within a couple of years after that, we were going as a Christian mentoring family with our children to become his family because his family abandoned him when he accepted Christ as his Savior. And the gospel says, for those who give up family or fields or homes for the sake of Jesus Christ, they will be provided family, fields, and homes. And we said, we need to be family for him. I remember the day in November of 2009 when, after years and years and years and years of parole hearings and investigations and coming and getting put off and waiting and just went on forever, we picked him up the day of his parole at Everglades Correctional, down by Havana practically. I believe it was 450 miles one way from Jacksonville. And as he came through that gate, Susan put her arms around him and said, Kenny, today is the first day of the rest of your life. We and you are involved in making resurrection stories happen. It is the resurrection here and now in our midst. This is what we do. This is what you do. And so we need to help each other and support each other, because it gets hard. It gets hard when it seems like there's a massive stone over the door to that tomb and nobody's going to get out. Hope comes hard. And we need to be here for each other, to hold each other up in hope and keep each other pushing forward. Kenny is now the director of House of Hope in Gainesville, Florida, a reentry program for both men and women. His wife, Kathy, is a volunteer with the women. And Kenny, yes. Stand up, Kathy. I promised you wouldn't have to say anything. I didn't tell you wouldn't have to stand up. And Kenny and Kathy are the founders of Save a Man Ministries for going inside the prisons and trying to bring hope to inmates, even if they're in the situation Kenny was, with 2 consecutive life sentences followed by a bunch of years. Everybody said there was no way he could ever get out. But God is bigger, amen? Amen. As a married couple, Kenny and Kathy minister exhaustively in Florida prisons. Last month alone, they spent 49 clock hours standing in front of inmates in prisons in Florida, usually in the chapels, both male and female inmates. And they logged over 3,000 miles driving in Florida last month doing that work, above and beyond the work that Kenny is employed for the reentry houses. So we are here from Florida to join you today, to meet you, and to learn about the wonderful thing that you're doing, because we know it will excite and invigorate us to go back to Florida and work even harder. So what is Pope Francis talking about this stuff of stripping ourselves of worldliness? About stripping ourselves of the spirit opposing the spirit of the Beatitudes? About stripping ourselves of the spirit that opposes the spirit of Jesus Christ? As we embark on these discussions today, I want to call you to 2 foundational principles. The first is that one rarely hears about social justice, our God-given duty to care for our fellow men and women. One rarely hears about that in popular discussions of the Last Judgment, especially on TV or radio. They're not talking about that. But in Jesus' description of the Last Judgment, it appears that our choices, whether or not to extend ourselves to care for the suffering of others, matter a great deal. Some commentators have summed up the words of Jesus Christ in Matthew 25, verses 34 to 40, as follows. Radical evil is apathy in the face of relievable human suffering. Radical evil is apathy in the face of relievable human suffering. This usage of the term radical is in its classic sense as the root. The root of evil is apathy in the face of relievable human suffering. Secondly, and this principle has 2 prongs, compassion without competence is a cruel hoax. The first time I saw that, was in 1974 when I showed up to start at Notre Dame Law School, and it was carved in the stone over the entrance. I hope it's still there. They've done a lot of remodeling. Compassion without competence is a cruel hoax. And secondly, competence without compassion cannot touch the soul. And that's from my wife, Dr. Susan, who before coming to FSU had 17 years, over 17 years, working with severely mentally ill women in state institutions in North Florida. All of us in this work must discipline ourselves to a dual formation. We have a duty to arm ourselves with the knowledge, skills, and understanding to relieve human suffering in a competent manner. The most prevalent failing I encounter in this regard is a lack of understanding of trauma-informed care. In the field of reentry, trauma is everywhere. It's in childhood and pre-birth. It's in the family of origin and in the family home. It is in upbringing and the foster care system. Even if things are done correctly by the law, there was just a major report carried by the Marshall Project on the trauma to young children of even short-term separation from their parents. It is in juvenile and early adult offender systems. It is in the adult offender systems. In my book on prison ministry, I try to start each chapter on the needs of offenders with a description of what they have experienced in the justice system, trying to bring the reader inside their skin. Some people have complained. They said it's too intense to read. Well, wait a minute. We're trying to minister to the suffering of the people who had to go through it, even though it's too intense to survive. And we have a duty to maintain our own spiritual disciplines and our own personal work. Each of us, our own history of wounds and trauma, so that we are available to be compassionate to those we serve. Compassion comes from the two Latin root words cum passio. Cum meaning with, and passio means to suffer. The literal meaning of compassion is to suffer with. We suffer with the people God puts in our path for us to care for as though they are Jesus. When we engage in trauma-informed care for those we are receiving out of prisons and jails, we are choosing to stand with them, to suffer with them. It is the work of Simon of Cyrene in the Passion of Jesus Christ. Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus carry the load of the cross to Calvary. And if those we serve are the face of Jesus in our midst, and Jesus said they are, then we are there to help them carry their cross, which is His cross. We are Simon of Cyrene for the Jesus in our reentry. And we must do our work in order to be able to bear up to their suffering. Usually at this point someone says, well, have you done your work? And the answer is there's still a lot left to do. I've used the services of Big Bend Hospice for my grief counseling after executions. I've witnessed 19 executions in 21 years. And that's after falling in love with the person as God gave me the heart to love them as He loves them, and seeing that they are a child of God who has a tremendous ability to still do good in this world, and that they're loved by other people, and that no purpose is served by extinguishing their life except to garner votes. It doesn't even save money. It costs a fortune. It all goes to lawyers on the state side. It's absolutely pointless killing to satisfy the bloodthirst of the masses, just like Jesus' killing was. I have an EMDR trauma therapist. She jokes with me about it's time for me to squeeze the stones again. And she helps me deal with the horror of the state killings and the botched lethal injection that I witnessed. That is always in my face, in that glass, every time I'm sitting in the witness room for one of my people, so that they can see me through the glasses as they die. No matter how hard I try not to see the pictures of the horrendous botched lethal injection of Angel Diaz from December of 2006. It's always there in the reflection of the glass. I dread the trauma work, but I dread even more the consequences of not doing the trauma work. We have to do our own work, whether it comes from our own childhood or from the suffering of those we serve. It's just part of the deal. The breakouts for this conference today are dynamite. I hope to attend the one on trauma and others as well. Our Florida group will be here all day. In fact, I hear it might even snow. Thanks. Please feel free to introduce yourself to any one of us and share with us the great work you are doing for Jesus come to us in the face of the incarcerated. And God be with you. Thank you.